I talked to a realtor recently, and I said that I was on a $300,000 budget. I'd be open to as little as a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house. From there, I was pretty flexible. That wasn't flexible enough, apparently, because she said to me, Mike, if you want to be able to get a 3 bedroom, 1 bath house for under $300,000, you're going to be open to a fixer upper. What? Are you kidding me? Like, my first house was a 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom house, 9 years old. Everything was brand new on it. Garage, beautiful property. I paid like $171,000 for it. That same house today is untouchable on that budget. Even a fixer-upper with 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and nowhere near as good a condition as the house that I bought years ago, on a $300,000 budget, maybe we'll be able to get you a fixer-upper. Are you kidding me? The question is why? All right, and the answer is you have two competing interests. On one side, you have young people who can't afford to buy houses. If you're a young person, you're SOL. Because even the people I know who own houses my age, they're so stressed out. They can't afford to keep up with their payments. They certainly can't afford to have savings after keeping up with their payments. Now, you may be saying, well, 20 years ago, I remember people having that same situation. Yeah, but 20 years ago, it was people who made stupid decisions who were in that situation. 20 years ago, if you made good decisions, you could pretty comfortably afford a house and savings and put your kid through college. Nowadays, it's not the same at all. It's not even close to the same. I'm not talking about your friend who's 32 who works as a barista, or your other friend who's 29 working at Dollar Tree. I'm talking people who with have marketable skills, valuable skills. They made all the right decisions. They're making 80, 90 grand a year at 30 years old and still can't afford to buy a house in any decent county. And I know everyone's going to say, well, I know this place, Bumble F, South Dakota, or wherever in Tennessee that you can buy. I'm not talking about those houses. I'm talking about the average American county in a decent school district in a decent county with decent job security. Someone who makes 80 grand a year, 90 grand a year, couldn't dream of living in one of those counties. It just doesn't happen. And if they do, there are people who do. They're way overextended. They're stressed out. They hate their lives. I know people who do it. They hate their lives. Unless you're making like 150 grand a year, it is really tough to live in a middle class county. It just doesn't happen. So that leads me to the second competing interest. So the first competing interest is young people can't afford to buy houses. We need to figure out how to solve that problem, right? Second competing interest is you have elderly people who rely on their home equity for retirement. They need it, right? The average retiree doesn't have $4,000 liquid. I could be off by a little bit, but like I'm not off by a lot. Last time I looked, it was somewhere around $4,000 the average retiree had liquid. They're entirely dependent on the equity they have in their homes for retirement. They need those houses to continue up in value, which is why you can trace it as far back as when Alan Greenspan was the chair of the Federal Reserve during the Clinton administration, maybe even earlier. They have been putting in very purposeful, very strategic, and very intentional legislation to drive up housing prices. And that was for the purpose of pulling money from future generations and pulling it forward to those older generations, right? Our parents and our grandparents. They knew what they were doing. They're not stupid, right? I'm not, and to be clear, because I made a video before and it was misinterpreted, that's why I had to pull it down. I'm not talking about inheritance money. I'm not saying that your parents or grandparents owe you inheritance. I'm talking about the fact that your parents used crony capitalism. And sorry, I'm going back and forth, but I'm not a socialist. I am very much a capitalist. This is not capitalism. This is crony capitalism. Right? They used crony capitalism to drive up real estate prices at the expense of their own children and grandchildren. All right, if I could take a house I bought for $200,000 and I can put in these regulations and these different restrictions, zoning restrictions, so on and so forth, to drive up home costs, I can turn my $200,000 house into a $700,000 house, use that $500,000 to retire on, and then, well, I guess screw anybody who comes behind me. What bothers me the most is that these same people who will take that $500,000 of equity and make it that much more difficult for future generations to buy homes, what bothers me the most is that they'll come back and say, well, why don't young people just save more? Like, why don't they just make better decisions? They'd be able to afford houses. Bitch, the entire reason we're here is because you didn't save more. Like, years ago, everyone retired off of their 401ks and their pensions and their savings accounts. It is a relatively new concept to retire off the equity you have in your home. That's like a pretty new concept and a unique concept, because you go to places like Japan where you can build 20 apartments on like 1 acre, and they can build these little like $500-$600 a month apartments. You couldn't even do that in the United States in most counties, because they intentionally put zoning laws in place to where like you have to have this much land, you have to have this much square footage, and now it's gotten to the point to where if you're a new home contractor, it makes no sense to build a bunch of like low income $180,000 houses. Like, it's not even profitable because of all the regulation and EPA restrictions and so on and so forth. It's not even possible to even be a new home contractor unless you're building like $500,000 houses entire. It's not profitable otherwise. That's intentional. That's to drive up the cost of every other house. And they know what they're doing. These politicians aren't stupid. And you have these regular homeowners who are 60 years old who own a house they bought for $160,000. It's now worth $700,000. And they're like, well, I just made a good natural real estate investment because I'm a savvy investor. You got... Oh, man. That's another video for another day. But these people absolutely just cashed a post-dated check on the backs of their children and grandchildren. Like, they now are going to be able to retire after making years of bad decisions, having more credit card debt than any generation before them, having more luxury, higher standard of living. They got their game room in their basement, they got their beach house, they got their, buying a new car every 4 years while their children drive $5,000 cars. Like, these people have absolutely squeezed future generations for the purpose of making sure they can retire, even without actually making all the decisions you need to make as a responsible person to retire. And then have the balls to go back and say, why aren't young people just making better decisions and saving more? Like, excuse me? You're the reason. Like, if you would have saved more and made your decisions responsibly, none of us would be in this situation to begin with. The fact that you're so dependent on housing prices tripling or quadrupling in a decade or two is entirely tied to the fact that you didn't make other good financial decisions. This is crony. This isn't capitalism. I'm not a socialist. This is crony capitalism. This is like, if your capitalism is dependent on politicians tweaking laws to make sure that you continue being profitable, that is not capitalism. I'm sorry, I'm knocking over my phone here. That's not capitalism. I'm sorry. That's you manipulating the system to your best interest. Very much at the expense of your children and grandchildren, you lowlife.